Today, I'm breaking down the massive deception that made Hitler question everything. But here's what nobody tells you about this operation. The fake army wasn't even the craziest part. What came after D-Day makes inflatable tanks look like child's play. The setup. Operation Fortitude wasn't one plan. It was two massive deceptions, running simultaneously to split German attention. Fortitude North threatened Norway with a fake invasion force, tying down 27 German divisions who thought the Allies were coming through Scandinavia. That's thousands of troops sitting in the frozen north, waiting for an attack that would never come. Fortitude South was the real star. This operation created the first United States Army Group, or FUSAG, a completely fictional force of up to 1 million men supposedly gathering in southeast England. The Germans believed FUSAG would launch the main invasion at Pas de Calais, the closest point between England and France. Makes sense strategically, which is exactly why the Allies picked it as their lie. The entire plan fell under Operation Bodyguard, the umbrella strategy for D-Day deception. Churchill himself supposedly named it, saying, "In wartime, truth is so precious that she should always be attended by a bodyguard of lies." Dramatic as hell, but that's basically what they did. They wrapped the real invasion in so many layers of misdirection that Hitler couldn't find the truth if it punched him in the face. This wasn't improvised either. Planning started in late 1943 after the Tehran Conference, where the Allies agreed on invasion timeline. And a British officer named Colonel David Strangeways rewrote the original plans in February 1944 to make them more believable. By March, everything was ready to go. The Allies had their script, their props, and their actors. Now they just needed the Germans to buy it, and the Germans did buy it, but not because of what you'd expect. The props barely mattered. The radio signals were questionable. So what actually sold the lie? Keep that in mind, because when you see what the Allies prioritized, you'll realize this whole operation was built backward from how you'd think. The hardware. Here's where it gets weird. The fake army used inflatable tanks made of rubber that weighed 90 pounds when deflated. You could carry one under your arm, pump it up with a bicycle pump in a few hours, and from 500 feet in the air, it looked exactly like a real M4 Sherman tank. They painted them with realistic camouflage, added fake tracks by dragging equipment through the mud, and positioned them in fields where German reconnaissance planes could spot them. The Allies built over 600 of these things. They also made dummy aircraft from plywood and canvas, fake artillery pieces, rubber trucks, and even inflatable landing craft nicknamed Big Bob. British film studios like Shepperton got contracted to build this stuff, which makes sense because who else knows how to make convincing fake? These studios had been making movie props for years. Now, they were making props to fool the Luftwaffe. The visual deception wasn't perfect though. Weather damaged the equipment constantly. Wind flipped the Big Bobs. Rain made the paint run. Some of the inflatables got punctured and deflated overnight. But here's the thing, it didn't matter. The Germans weren't flying many reconnaissance missions over England by 1944 because the Royal Air Force controlled the skies. Most of what German intelligence knew came from other sources. That's why the physical props were actually the least important part. They looked good, sure, but they were basically expensive set dressing. The real deception happened through radio signals and human intelligence. The dummies just had to be convincing enough that if a German plane did get photos, they'd confirm what the double agents were already saying. Which raises an interesting question. If the physical deceptions were basically window dressing, why go through all that trouble? Why build 600 inflatable tanks if German planes weren't even flying over to see them? The answer connects to something the Allies knew about Hitler's psychology that most people miss. The agent. Double agents were the backbone of Fortitude. Britain's MI5 had captured dozens of German spies early in the war and flipped them through a program called the Double Cross system. These agents fed controlled information back to German intelligence, the Abwehr, making them think they were getting valuable intel, when really they were being played. The most important agent was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed Garbo. This Spanish guy wanted to fight fascism so badly that he invented an entire spy network from scratch. He created 27 fictional subagents with detailed backstories and convinced the Germans he was running a massive intelligence operation across Britain. The Germans trusted him completely. They even awarded him the Iron Cross, a German military medal for his contribution. Garbo sent over 500 messages about FUSAG. He reported troop movements, equipment shipments, and construction activity, all carefully designed to reinforce the Calais invasion story. On June 9th, 3 days after D-Day, he sent a message saying Normandy was just a diversion and the real attack was still coming at Calais. Hitler read that message and believed it. He kept 19 divisions pinned at Calais for weeks, waiting for an invasion that never came. Another key agent was Roman Czerniawski, codenamed Brutus. He was a Polish officer who got captured and agreed to spy for Germany, except he was actually working for the Allies the whole time. He fed technical details about FUSAG units and corroborated validated Garbo's report. The Germans cross-referenced their agent's information and thought they were getting confirmation from independent sources. They had no idea both guys were reading from the same script. But here's where it gets really clever. The Allies used Ultra, their decryption of German communication, to verify the deception was working. Every time the Germans sent an encrypted message discussing Fusag or the Calais threat, British codebreakers read it and adjusted the deception accordingly. It was a closed feedback loop. The Allies knew exactly what the Germans believed and could fine-tune the lies in real time. This feedback system revealed something disturbing. The Germans weren't just being fooled. They were actively helping sell the deception to themselves. And once you understand why, you'll see how the whole operation exploited a flaw in human reasoning that still gets people today. The radio. Radio deception was Operation Quicksilver's technical backbone. The Allies set up over 100 radio operators broadcasting fake traffic 24 hours a day. These guys mimicked the communication patterns of real military units, using proper procedures, call sign, and message formatting. They even copied the transmission styles of specific operators, because German intelligence could identify individual radio operators by their fist, the unique rhythm they used when tapping Morse code. The fake transmissions simulated a massive buildup of forces. They'd send supply requests, movement orders, weather reports, all the mundane administrative chatter that comes with moving hundreds of thousands of troops. The volume of traffic alone suggested huge numbers. If you're broadcasting signals that match a core-sized element, the enemy assumes there's actually a core there. They position the transmitters strategically too. Most of the radio traffic came from southeast England, the area closest to Calais, reinforcing the idea that Fusag was staging there for a cross-channel assault. They coordinated the broadcast with agent reports, so everything aligned. When Garbo reported a unit moving from one location to another, the radio operators would shift their signals to match. But there's debate about how effective the radio deception actually was. Some declassified reports suggest German intelligence didn't trust radio intercepts much by 1944 because they knew the Allies might be manipulating them. One analysis found no evidence the radio deception significantly influenced German thinking. The agents did the heavy lifting. The radio was just supporting evidence that made the agents' stories more believable. Still, the Allies went all in on. They assigned entire units to radio deception. Operation Sky in the north used radio signals to simulate the 4th British Army threatening Norway. Quicksilver in the south had multiple radio plans running simultaneously. It was overkill, but when you're planning the biggest invasion in history, you don't take chances. Except the radio deception might have been solving a completely different problem than everyone thought. The real purpose wasn't about fooling German intelligence. It was about something else entirely, something that becomes obvious once you see who was actually listening. The figurehead. General George Patton was Fusag's commander, which was perfect casting. Patton was famous, aggressive, and exactly the kind of general you'd put in charge of a massive invasion force. The Germans respected and feared him. They'd fought him in North Africa and Sicily. They knew his style. So when intelligence reports said Patton was commanding Fusag in England, it made total sense. Patton hated it. He'd been sidelined after slapping 2 soldiers in Sicily and was desperate to get back into combat. Instead, Eisenhower made him the face of a fake army. He had to make public appearances in southeast England, inspect dummy equipment, and basically play pretend while everyone else prepared for the real invasion. But his presence sold the deception. German intelligence tracked Patton obsessively. When he showed up somewhere, they assumed that's where the action was. The Allies exploited this by having him tour fake installations and meet with fictional units. Every photo op, every public sighting reinforced the Fusag story. After D-Day, the Allies had to explain why Patton wasn't leading the invasion. They leaked information that Fusag had been reorganized, and Patton was now commanding the 3rd Army in Normandy. The Germans bought it. They still believed Fusag existed, just under different leadership, and the Calais invasion was still coming. Patton finally got back into action in late July, when the 3rd Army broke out from Normandy. By then, Fortitude had done its job. German reserves were scattered, reinforcements were delayed, and the Allies had the momentum they needed. Patton went on to race across France, and the fake army that launched his comeback became one of history's greatest military lies. But Patton's humiliation served a purpose beyond the deception. The Allies needed him angry. They needed him desperate, because what they had planned for him after D-Day required that exact mindset, and it worked better than anyone expected. The execution. D-Day happened on June 6, 1944. 156,000 Allied troops hit 5 beaches in Normandy, while airborne divisions dropped inland to secure key positions. It was chaos. Men died by the thousands on beaches like Omaha, but the Germans were confused and slow to respond because they thought this might be a diversion. Hitler was literally asleep when the invasion started. His staff didn't wake him because nobody wanted to disturb the Führer without being sure it was the main attack. When he finally woke up and got briefed, he hesitated to commit the panzer reserves because he still believed the real invasion was coming at Calais. Rommel, the general in charge of defending France, had gone home to Germany to celebrate his wife's birthday. The entire German command structure was caught flat-footed. That night, the Allies ran additional deceptions to reinforce the confusion. Operation Titanic dropped 500 dummy paratroopers with firecrackers and sound effects to simulate a massive airborne assault near Calais. Operations Glimmer and Taxable used aircraft dropping aluminum strips to create fake radar signatures of invasion fleets heading toward Pas de Calais. The Germans scrambled forces to defend against attacks that weren't happening. On June 9th, Garbo sent his masterpiece message. He reported that his network had confirmed Normandy was a diversionary attack, and the main force was still preparing to strike Calais. Hitler read that message personally. He was so convinced that he refused to release the panzer divisions at Calais, even as his generals begged him to reinforce Normandy. 19 divisions sat there doing nothing, while the Allies expanded their beachhead. The deception held for weeks. By the time the Germans realized they'd been fooled, it was too late. The Allies had landed hundreds of thousands of troops, established supply line, and started pushing inland. Fortitude bought them the time they needed to turn a precarious landing into a secure foothold. Without it, D-Day might have failed. The Germans would have concentrated their forces, counterattacked harder, and potentially pushed the Allies back into the sea. Yet Fortitude was just the opening act. What the Ghost Army did next took these deception principles and weaponized them in ways the planners never intended. They discovered something on the front lines that changed how armies think about warfare. The Ghost. While Fortitude was fooling Hitler strategic, a separate American unit was taking deception to the tactical. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troop, better known as the Ghost Army, was activated in January 1944. This was a mobile deception unit of 1,100 men whose job was to impersonate real division and make the enemy think large forces were places they weren't. The Ghost Army used the same tools as Fortitude, but added new tricks. They had sonic trucks equipped with 500-watt speakers that could broadcast recorded tank and vehicle sounds up to 15 miles away. These recordings were made at Fort Knox with Bell Labs equipment and mixed on site to match specific scenario. You want it to sound like a tank battalion moving at night. They had a recording for that. They also had artists, literal professional artists and designers who'd been recruited for their creative skill. Guys like Bill Blass, who became a famous fashion designer after the war, and Ellsworth Kelly, who became a renowned painter. These guys designed the visual deception, painted the dummies, and created fake insignia and unit patches. They made everything look authentic because they understood visual detail in ways regular soldiers didn't. The Ghost Army conducted over 20 operations between June 1944 and March 1945. They'd roll into an area, set up hundreds of inflatable tanks and trucks, broadcast sounds, and have soldiers wearing fake unit patches hang out in local bars spreading rumors. They'd impersonate entire divisions while the real units moved elsewhere. Then they'd pack up and do it again somewhere else. But moving from town to town created an unexpected problem. Local civilians saw them setting up fake equipment. They watched artists painting rubber tanks. Anyone could have blown their cover with a single careless word to the wrong person. So how did they keep an entire operation secret while operating in public? The solution was darker than you'd think. One of their biggest operations was during the Brittany campaign in August 1944. The Ghost Army simulated a force encircling Brest to tie down German defenders, while Patton's Third Army advanced east. They set up 50 dummy vehicles and broadcast radio traffic suggesting a major offensive. The Germans kept troops in Brest instead of reinforcing against Patton's actual advance. This is where the Ghost Army's tactics evolved into something new. They weren't just creating illusions anymore. They were learning to manipulate how armies make decisions under pressure. And one operation pushed that manipulation to an extreme that made commanders question if they'd gone too far. The Rhine. In March 1945, the Ghost Army ran Operation Fearson to help American forces cross the Rhine River. They set up 600 inflatable vehicles and used sonic deception to simulate a massive force preparing to cross at one location while the real crossing happened elsewhere. They impersonated 40,000 troops with 1,100 men. The Germans diverted forces to defend against the fake threat, and when the real attack came, there was minimal resistance. The operation worked so well that casualties were significantly lower than expected. Commanders estimated the deception saved thousands of lives by drawing German artillery and infantry away from the actual crossing point. After the war, military analysts calculated the Ghost Army's 22 operations saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives by diverting enemy attention and firepower. But it came at a cost. Operating close to front lines meant danger. 3 Ghost Army soldiers were killed and 30 wounded during their operation. These guys weren't combat troops. They were artists artists, and engineers pretending to be tankers and infantry. When things went wrong, they had no backup and limited weapon. They relied on speed and deception to stay alive, which makes you wonder what happened when the deception failed. Because it did fail, at least once. And when it fell apart, the Ghost Army found themselves in a situation they were never trained for, armed with props instead of weapons, facing an enemy that suddenly knew exactly what they were. The unit was so secret that most soldiers didn't know what they were doing until decades later. The operations remained classified until the mid-1990s. Family members had no idea their relatives had been in a deception unit. They thought they'd served in signal companies or headquarters units doing administrative work. It wasn't until documents got declassified that the full story came out. In 2022, Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, one of the highest civilian honors in America. By then, most of the veterans were in their 90s or had already died, but the recognition acknowledged what they'd done, how they'd used creativity and courage to save lives without firing shots. They'd fought with art instead of ammunition, and proved deception could be as powerful as any weapon. But there's a reason the Ghost Army stayed classified for 50 years. It wasn't just about protecting tactics. Some of their operations crossed lines that made the military uncomfortable. Lines that become obvious when you look at what they were really doing to enemy soldiers psychologically. The aftermath. Operation Fortitude officially ended in September 1944 when the Germans finally figured out Fusag didn't exist. By then, it didn't matter. The Allies had broken out of Normandy, liberated Paris, and were pushing toward Germany. The deception had served its purpose. It delayed German reinforcements during the critical weeks after D-Day, when the invasion could have been thrown back into the sea. Ultra intercepts from after the war confirmed how completely the Germans had been fooled. Hitler's staff genuinely believed Normandy was a feint until mid-July. They kept divisions at Calais waiting for the real invasion. German intelligence reports mentioned Fusag throughout the summer, discussing its strength and potential targets. They never suspected it was entirely fictional. The operation influenced military thinking for decades. Deception became a formal part of military doctrine. The U.S. Army developed principles for military deception, or MILDEC, based on lessons from Fortitude and the Ghost Army. Modern forces still use similar tactics, like inflatable decoys during the Gulf War in 1991 to draw Iraqi fire away from real position. But there's debate about how much credit Fortitude deserves. Some historians argue it was decisive, that without it D-Day would have failed. Others say German strategic failures, poor communication, and Hitler's micromanagement were more important factors. Weather played a role too. The invasion happened during a brief break in storm, and German meteorologists didn't predict it. So many German officers were away from their posts. The truth is probably somewhere in between. Fortitude didn't win the war alone, but it tipped the scales. It exploited German weaknesses and amplified Allied advantages. Combined with air superiority, naval dominance, and overwhelming force, the deception gave the Allies the edge they needed. Even if it only delayed German reinforcements by a few days, that was enough to make the difference. The scary part? Modern analysis suggests Fortitude worked too well. If you enjoyed this video and want to see the World War II attack that destroyed its own army, click the video on the screen.